So as already been alluded to, the EU and Canada have made ambitious commitments to climate change through partnership and through the CETA. And in this panel that we're going to have, our experts and our industry leaders will share their experiences and their insights on both sustainable development and sustainable international trade, exploring how this EU-Canada partnership can create new opportunities for businesses, and maybe asking a lot of those questions that Perry has put before us. So your task is very easy. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and as I do so, I'd like to invite our panelists to please come up and take your seats. So our moderator for this, come on up, for this first panel is Claire Kennedy, who is a senior advisor on clients and industries with Bennett Jones. Please, thank you. Claire is a leading tax and transfer pricing lawyer in Canada, representing large taxpayers during audits with and disputes with the CRA. She's also a professional engineer and serves on the executive of the International Fiscal Association's Canada branch. And among numerous endeavors, she's also chair of the board of Neo Performance Materials, Inc. So Claire will now introduce our speakers and moderate our panel.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Kathy, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you here today. I've got three great panelists, and we're going to have a lively conversation, which I think, given the breadth of the topic, is going to be a little bit more like a smorgasbord than a deep dive on sustainability. But to my far left, I'm joined by Kshitish Agarwal, who's the VP Power Systems Sales and Operations for Schneider Electric Canada. Kshitish has over 18 years of experience at Schneider in international roles in India, Africa, Hong Kong, and the Middle East. He's also actively engaged with the Mississauga Board of Trade and is a core member of the Environment, Sustainability, and Infrastructure Committee there. Welcome, Kshitish. Next to Kshitish is Michael Harvey, who's been Vice President, Policy and International at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce since 2021. Michael has extensive experience in multinational contexts. For 7 years, he was the Director of Corporate Affairs for the Latin American operations of Goldcorp, one of the world's leading gold companies. And prior to that, Michael was a Canadian diplomat for 15 years, with postings to the UN and to South America. And in 2012, he was President and CEO of the Canadian Council of the Americas. To my immediate left is Brent Trenga, Director of Sustainability for Kingspan Insulated Panels, North America. As Director of Sustainability, but with a background as an architect, construction manager, developer, and project owner, he can give us a really kaleidoscopic perspective on the construction industry. I have to say, Brent, that I love Kingspan's sustainability policy called Planet Passionate, and we'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about that. But before I ask our panelists some questions, I'm going to ask our audience. And so by a show of hands, how many of you are here with an organization that has adopted a sustainability policy or goal statement? Raise your hands. Raise your hands if you have. Okay, so we've got a few in the room. And whether you're talking about your own organization's a sustainability policy or that of others, how many people think that sustainability policies are fully integrated into corporate strategy? Okay, smattering. How many think that they could be more fully integrated? Okay, I think that one wins the day. So that's a perfect setup for our conversation today, because we're going to touch on various aspects of this. So let me go now to our panel, and I'm going to ask each of you to encapsulate how your organization is approaching sustainability. And if you could illustrate that with a concrete example, that would be great. Let me start with you, Kshitish.
Perfect. Let me start by saying something bold, right? Sustainability is not an option. It is imperative for business to continue operating and continuously growing, right? And at Schneider, we are extremely proud of leading sustainability. Not just in the recent times, you would have seen Schneider getting the most sustainable company award, but since 2008, we have been declaring our sustainability results. And we have been doing a lot of work internally within Schneider operations to make our operations sustainable. Just to emphasize what we are doing to further the agenda, in 4 years back, we created a dedicated division, which we call as sustainability business now. It is on top of the core businesses we have. And now what we have learned internally by walking the talk on sustainability, we are taking and helping our customers drive sustainable operations in order to help them deliver a more sustainable business. Canadian landscape is unique. 95% of our businesses are small and medium. We saw with the show of hands how many companies have sustainability agenda integrated. They need help. There is a big push coming from the federal government to drive sustainability in building, transport, and industry business. And it is also a core responsibility of public-private relationships, partnerships to drive sustainability across the board. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Shatish. So I understand that you're saying that at Schneider Electric, there is a sustainability unit that's separate from the other ones that is coordinating with customers and really advancing the agenda.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
a
dedicated team.
A dedicated team. That's an interesting approach. Let me turn to Brent. Brent, talk to us about Planet Passionate.
Yeah, so I'll reinforce what was stated and actually mentioned earlier of how we define sustainability. I don't think we're on a path that we can continue a sustainable future. I think we've done a significant amount of damage that we have to now reverse and to be almost decarbonize into a positive state. A net sum zero is not really a win in this game. So for Kingspan, just for some context, we're a global organization. We've got 220 manufacturing sites, 10 of which are in Canada, 22,000 people in our business, and we've set probably the most aggressive sustainability targets. It's a 10-year goal by 2030. It focuses on energy, carbon, circularity, and water, the four major kind of impact areas for Kingspan as we operate our business. The targets are absolute zero. We've continued to double down as we're a large acquisition company. As we've gained businesses and added to the business, we've gone back and re-baselined, and the numbers are absolute zero carbon manufacturing, really getting direct renewable energy sources, really operating the business and decarbonizing the products that we actually make and manufacture, ultimately benefiting the customers for the buildings that we build.
Great, thanks, Brent. Let me come to you, Michael.
Sure. So for us, sustainability at the Chamber is absolutely central to our business advocacy. We're Canada's largest business advocacy organization, representing some 200,000 companies across the country through... Closer? Sorry. So we represent some 200,000 Canadian companies through the provincial and local chambers. To give a couple of examples of maybe some of our subgroups that concentrate most on sustainability issues, I'd mention our Net Zero Council, which represents some of Canada's most innovative companies who have committed to 2050 net zero targets for their companies. I'd mention our Critical Minerals Council, hello David, who are a group of companies working on pushing a critical minerals agenda with the federal government. I'd mention our Food Supply Council, which is largely focused on sustainability issues in the agricultural industry. And we're just launching a Sustainable Finance Council to work a lot on standardization and pushing sustainability measurement with the federal government. And I'd just broadly talk about our business advocacy. One issue that we worked on a lot lately, and you might have seen quite a bit of press about, has been our work on natural gas. Mr. Spitznagel would be very pleased with the messaging that we're pushing. I don't know if I pronounced your name right. Normally I don't have a problem as a Nova Scotian with Newfoundlanders' last names, but basically, we're making exactly the same points that were being made just a few minutes ago. So we're working always from a business perspective, or you could say a common sense perspective, on practical decarbonization measures.
Great, thank you, Michael. And that your commentary on natural gas, I think, is a really good segue into our next question. I want to touch on stakeholder management, and I'm going to partially paraphrase President Kennedy, who said, "Victory has 1,000 fathers." And I would say that sustainability probably has 1,000 stakeholder parents, and perhaps like parents, those stakeholders don't always agree. And so businesses have to navigate this tricky terrain Are things going too fast, or are they going too slow? Is it too hot or too cold? And there's folks that are would say all of the above or none of the above. So I'm going to come to you, Brent, and then I'm going to come to Shatish and ask you to describe a few of your key stakeholder constituencies and talk to us, frankly, about whether there are challenges in reconciling their interests and goals.
Yeah, probably the most aggressive of the targets we've set was our scope 1 and 2 emissions are absolute zero, and we can control that as a business. It's to scope 3 emissions, so our supply chain, the largest of that being steel and raw materials as a global supplier. The steel industry, we're very lucky in North America to have somewhat clean steel in the U.S. and Canada. Europe is not. It's a significantly different carbon intensity for steel manufactured. We set a 50% absolute reduction in our primary supply chain carbon intensity by 2030, and that ultimately means that suppliers that don't want to come on that journey with us will no longer be doing business with our business. So that's really aggressive. We've set very interesting in 2020 as we met all of those key stakeholders and brought them to our headquarters. You could see kind of the glassed over look in some. You could see the very much we need to get involved in this, and it's being asked of us from other buyers, customers, and some that are very well along that journey, which is exciting. We continue to have those supply chain partner engagements. We just had a few steel companies in North America just a few weeks ago. That same parity. Some are setting absolute, in pair, in step goals with us for 2030 with a 50% reduction, new technology, new innovation. Great to see that kind of part. And the other being probably not going to be in our portfolio in a few years' time, aligned with goals at the rapid pace we're moving. So it's changed quite a bit in the last few years. The automotive industry is helping a huge push on steel. We're a large business, but they buy even more steel than us. And they're obviously making the same ask. The General Motors, the Fords, Tesla are all asking the same of the steel industry. I was in Atlanta for a steel conference last year and the year before, something I would have never attended. All 4 CEOs from all 4 major steel companies in the U.S. were on stage talking about their sustainability goals and decarbonizing their industry. That was not even a topic in years past for that conference. So it's interesting, the pressure from investment, the pressure from kind of the public sector is really driving this in a very positive light.
I think that's interesting because from the outside, I think there's a lot of folks that would say that sustainability is really being driven by by activists, by public pressure. But what you're highlighting here, Brent, is that there is a B2B driver for sustainability as people go up and down their supply chains, looking for partners whose goals are aligned with theirs. And I think it highlights then that we need to provide the right supports for small and medium-sized enterprises who perhaps need some help on that journey and just don't have the scale that some of the others do. But it's interesting how that driving force is now being sort of adopted internally. Shatish, give us your perspective on stakeholder management.
So very similar to Brent, right? Again, at Schneider, very aggressive targets to achieve carbon neutrality, 2030 net zero with carbon offsets, 2050 net zero, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And it has its ripple effects, right? Because when we start touching scope 2 and scope 3, we are talking our suppliers to go carbon neutral as well. And this is what we are seeing, not only driven by the large organizations like Schneider here, Kingspan, but also the industry boards have started driving the sustainability agenda, right? I was in the Canadian Green Building Council panel a few weeks back, and we are talking about MEP 40. That means they are urging all the consultants who are writing these specs for all these fancy buildings to only specify green products, right? So that's a big impact on all the manufacturers who are supplying the building materials, and it is massive. We don't feel it sitting in this room. Just to give you a context, it took us 100 years to build our electricity grid, and we are asking to decarbonize it in 20 years, right? When we talk about the Canadian Green Building Council, they are asking now all the companies to submit their product profiles, green product profiles. It takes them 2 years just to get one certificate on a green product profile. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. There are some quick wins that can be adopted by the small, medium businesses, right? Starting with just measuring what their carbon footprint is, where their GHG emissions are, what are some of the basic steps that can be done, right? As I keep saying to myself and to my team, Rome was not built in one day, right? But we have to start building Rome, right? So there is a long journey. And at Schneider, even though we got voted as the best, most sustainable company, but we are a part of this journey as well, right? We are learning by doing it ourselves. We are learning with our customers, and there is a lot to be done.
Great, thanks, Satish. Can you just give us an example? You're talking about partnering with your customers. So talk to us a little bit then about Schneider Electric's business and how that's actually manifesting itself.
Sure. Again, great question. Schneider, if we look at the operations of Schneider, we are the global specialist in energy management and automation controls, right? So you will see us everywhere, wherever you will need electricity, and we need electricity, right? Electricity is the most green form of energy. And just to give an example of the retail brand, you all are aware of Walmart, right? So Walmart, you would have seen them announcing very aggressive carbon net zero operations. What does that mean, right? That means that all their supplier base has to drive net zero commitments sooner than they would have planned initially. So we obviously work closely with Walmart to help them define their strategy. And now with the Walmart making such aggressive commitments, there are a lot of suppliers of Walmart who have reached out to us in understanding how they can drive more sustainability. I'll come closer to the home, right? So at Schneider, we use our distributors to drive our products into the marketplace. And recently we were having a C-suite discussion with our biggest channel partner, Gillive. There is no urgency in that space right now to drive sustainability. It is more driven by the industry as such. But the leadership position Gillive wanted to take is, okay, how do I make my operations net zero? And we engaged in a discussion, and there are companies who are now starting using sustainability as a differentiator in the marketplace. And as I keep saying again and again, it is coming at a much faster pace than we think it is.
Can I add something to you bring up a great point in terms of the energy, the grid, and really that as a key supplier to this whole piece. There's three main targets for us that are absolutely probably the biggest challenge in the next 7-8 years. Is 60% of our footprint is direct renewable energy. Every Kingspan site that we own globally, we will have on-site generation, wind or power, and 20% of that total footprint is generated on a Kingspan site. And the challenge we've had over the last couple of years, specifically in Canada, is decarbonizing mainly natural gas and mainly electricity. I hate to say it, but Ontario is heavily kind of influenced by the nuclear sector here. There's no incentive to run, to put on-site generation, to put solar. Our landlords are not really enticed to put solar on our facilities. So it's been a challenge sourcing renewable electricity, direct renewable, not RECs, not PPAs, or not VPPAs, in our grid, sourcing direct renewable energy. Natural gas has been an even bigger challenge. We're just now having positive solutions with Fortis and Enbridge that are now supplying renewable natural gas within the grid on kind of their smaller production. The cost is prohibitive. It's a 10x of what you would pay for natural gas at this point. So it's a very short-term solution to electrification, I would say. And the companies leading this are, we're starting with coal, we're going to natural gas, but we're really going for completely zero carbon fuel sources or electrification.
Some interesting perspectives, and all illustrating that in some cases your most demanding stakeholder may be in your supply chain and not outside it. Michael, let me come to you. I want to bring you into the conversation. How do business and industry associations like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce operate to help member organizations address sustainability effectively, especially to a broad audience of stakeholders?
Sure. So our members overwhelmingly come to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to deal with one stakeholder, which is the Ottawa blob. But I could be mildly sort of more. How can I say?
Not the sargassum blob that's off the coast of Florida, but okay, the Ottawa blob.
The Ottawa blob. But I mean, I can be a more more delicate in that and bring that down. There's a lot of elements of the Ottawa blob, and I spent part of my career as a civil servant wondering why business couldn't understand government, and then part of my career as a mining executive wondering why government couldn't understand business. So we really try to bring those worlds together in the interest of business, and on sustainability in particular, to try to influence the decisions of the Ottawa blob that affect business in the sustainability field. So a lot of that, the Canadian Chamber, we try to be a super stakeholder for the government, is what it comes down to. I mean, they're our stakeholder, we're their stakeholder. We try to be the organization that they call first when they're looking to understand what business wants out of them. And I think in general we succeed in that. When we phone ministers' offices, they answer the call, which as a former executive, that's not always super easy. So we can provide our members with very good access to government. This week has been a special week. We had our Hill Days in Ottawa on Monday and Tuesday, and we had the Prime Minister, we had a dozen ministers, we had large groups of members of Parliament, both from government, the opposition. So we try to influence all that process through both private meetings like the ones we had this week, through media, both earned and bought, and through research work that we often commission through our councils, or through our Future of Business Center, which prepared the paper on natural gas, which you might have seen reference to in the media over the past few weeks.
Great, thanks, Michael. Let's move, and I want to focus a bit on an international perspective. We've touched on it. We've touched on it already, but let's go a little bit deeper on that. And Brent, I'm going to come to you first. So Kingspan has an international footprint. Can you give us some insights from a global perspective on adoption and execution of sustainability goals? Are there differences across geographies? And what is that driven by? Is it policy difference? Give us a sort of a lay of the lands, if I can ask you for that.
Yeah, that it's a pretty broad question. There's a lot to that. So for our business, as I mentioned, we operate in 80 countries. We are based in Ireland. We're an Irish-based company. The Planet Passionate targets that I mentioned and referenced are global. So every single individual business unit is accountable to meet the same metrics and the same goals for Kingspan Group as a holding. So we are kind of doesn't really matter what region or what business you're in. Everyone is accountable to the same level. The challenges by region are vast. I will say that, and obviously some of the policy and things that are going on in Europe are accelerating quite a bit of that. For instance, just the landfill. There's an interesting, it's very cheap to put trash in a landfill in North America. That is very different than almost every European country. The electricity grid being so separated, so different in the US and Canada compared to what goes on in Europe. Heat certificates and other renewable assets. But as you move further into kind of Western Europe, that's much harder to do. We're seeing a lot of difficulties building on-site generation projects and things like that. As I already alluded to, in the US and Canada, the direct renewable and natural gas component for us is a real big challenge. There's, I would say, Schneider, Nextera, some of the biggest developers in North America they're building projects as fast as they possibly can bring them online. The challenge there is, even if you get into one of these contracts, it could be years out before it's actually delivered. Someone had mentioned about permitting and accelerating those things. That is critical. The interconnect times to build and bring these projects on scale is really difficult. So it's one of those we can't move fast enough kind of situations. But the ask has to be there, and I think the more, and you can see it as more and more large companies are requiring it and driving it. It is trying to play catch up, but the energy grid is really, it's archaic, to be honest. So there's a lot of challenges there. I think globally we don't do business in kind of China, and that hasn't really been a problematic area for us, but other kind of developing countries, it's in South America, they're, I would say, a decade behind in terms of a lot of what's gone on in North America and Europe. So yeah, it's diverse pretty much in every major region.
Good. Shatish, I want to bring you into this international conversation, but first I'm going to go to Michael. Michael, you have the international portfolio at the Chamber. You're just back from Tokyo and some meetings, and you've got a deep history both as a diplomat on the corporate sector and now in your role at the Chamber. So give us some international perspectives on this question of sustainability.
So last week I was in Tokyo for the B7, the Business 7 Summit, which is the group of business organizations like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce from the G7 countries. Striking how much the conversation concentrated on Russia, Ukraine, as the EU ambassador started our event today talking, and China, which is a little bit outside of today's panel, but is very central to everybody. For Canadian, it's striking when you speak to counterparts from other countries, just how we think that we think a lot about these global issues, but the reality is we're not as close as others are. And when you speak to your German counterparts, BDI, some people in this room would be able to pronounce what BDI stands for. They're very close to Russia and the Ukraine. We talked to our Japanese counterparts from Kaidanman. They are very close to China, and they're also close to Russia, where they were getting a lot of their natural gas. And where there's islands that have been Japanese at some points in history and Russian at other points in history. We were discussing overwhelmingly how these global issues are affecting business and how business can feed into these discussions. One thing I'd mention specifically on sustainability, we're all trying to influence our governments from a business perspective. Interesting talking to BDI again from Germany, who doesn't have exactly the same perspective on different technologies for the carbon transition as their political class might. Kai Danrin in Japan, who was also talking a lot about realism in their energy transition. They think that they're the slowest of the G7 countries in their energy transition, and they're trying to underline to their government just how complex some things are and how business perspectives are essential. So it's very interesting from this international perspective to see how things play out in different countries. Our Net Zero Council here has talked a lot about how decarbonization processes have to take into account regional differences inside Canada, how each province has a different grid, has different challenges. And what you see at the international level is that's the case for countries too.
Interesting. Shatish, let me come to you. You've worked on multiple continents. Schneider, as you said, is a global company. Give us your perspective on some of the driving forces and the differences and similarities that you see in the jurisdictions that Schneider operates in.
Easy to say, difficult to do, right? At Schneider, we have committed to the 6 goals which are linked to the Sustainability Development Goals from the UN Charter for the Paris Accord. It leads into the 11 key actions that we have committed to globally. And top of it, what we have done, we have asked all the countries to drive one local action with the common theme of acting for community, act green, drive sustainability. So this is where we are bringing in the localization for the region. All the regions are different. We have also adopted science-based targets, which keeps us in check in terms of having the consistency across the board in terms of how are we measuring sustainability. And it is also holding us accountable because this is not something nice to do. We are communicating our results in all our AGMs, in all our public results, which are coming every quarter. Again, demographics is different, situation is different, geopolitical situation is different. We just talked about what is happening in Eastern Europe. The cost of the electricity shot up like crazy during it's still very high. They started talking about heat pumps rather than natural gas, and the priorities are being governed by all these geopolitical and socioeconomic factors, right? But at Schneider, we try to maintain the consistency across the board, always respecting the local region we are in, but that does not change what we want to do as a group. But I can very well correlate with a lot of the small, medium businesses whom I've dealt with in all these different geographies. When the geopolitical scenario is that tough, it is a matter of survival, right? At that point in time, they are thinking about how to feed their employees, how to continue their business operations, rather talking about sustainability. So it becomes extremely important that we as an ecosystem rely on partnerships as well. No one company can drive full sustainability. We need to know who can do the work best and partner with them. And that's something which Schneider is extremely proud of, whether we are talking from innovation perspective or sustainability perspective or go-to-market perspective. We rely heavily on partnerships in the local communities, in the global ecosystem we operate in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this conversation is highlighting is the scale of the investments that need to be made and the policy certainty then that has to exist if businesses are going to make those very large commitments, with a lot of force to get this done on a timeline that is very aggressive. We can't have the policy sands sort of shifting all the time. And I want to come back to stakeholder management and talk about whether the public really understands this. But before we do, I want to let our audience know that there's going to be an opportunity for audience Q&A. So get your questions teed up here, and we'll have the opportunity to have some folks go around with microphones so you can ask our panelists questions. But let me come to innovation, which has got to be part of the solution to this challenge. And Brent, I'm gonna come back to you to talk to us about the drivers of innovation at Kingspan. I mean, you talked about rapid adoption of renewable energy on site, but give us a little more color, a little more depth on the innovation agenda at Kingspan and how it's changing what you do and what your customers are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. A few years back, we invested roughly 10 million euro in an innovation center that's at our headquarters in Ireland, and that's really been our global hub to spearhead all of the different aspects that we're challenged with, from the base, the actual main components of our products that we make, from our supply chain to our packaging materials, to the logistics of how we ship our products, to the efficiency that goes on in our factories, looking at short and really long-term, moving away from petroleum-based materials, from chemistry that's more bio-based. We've made a strategic investment in H2 Green Steel. We understand that is probably going to be that we're putting a big bet on hydrogen-based material. That's a proven technology. In fact, our team was out at the H2 Green Steel site where they're going to be building that factory. Looking at really all aspects of how this impacts our business. Energy is a forever cost, so looking at how we really monitor and consume less energy, and then find alternatives to kind of offset that energy. Looking at ways we can change our laminator facilities over to electric or geothermal systems. So really, almost everything that we can control is looked at as a way to change how we do business in the next 5 to 10 years. And then that supplier engagement piece, which is bringing them along with the journey. We can't do this by ourselves. We're a significant company, but just a drop in the ocean compared to the scale of what we need to change here. So it's bringing all of our supply chain and all of our partners working with and figuring out how they're innovating to bring. It's interesting to see some of the chemistry changes where bio-based technology or bio-based chemistry wasn't even on the radar a few years ago. Suddenly it was, we could maybe scale that in 5 years to suddenly we have a product to test. I mean, that rapid change because of the ask, because of the lean in on them, has been very exciting. So it's really across the board. Absolutely.
Great. Shitish, let me get your perspectives on innovation at Schneider.
At Schneider, again, innovation is not a function. Innovation is the culture at Schneider, right? And some of you who would have had some experience with Schneider has been known for a long time to provide the best quality, most innovative products to all our customer base, right? But over the past decade or so, we have been innovating not just in our business model, but how we go to market. I talked about the partnerships, which is extremely important when we are trying to drive the digital transformation of any organization, any customer we deal with. It is next to impossible for us to do all the things for that organization, right? So how do you partner with the software companies? How do you partner with the other hardware companies that you do not do? And I just finished reading a book from Satya Nadella. He talks about how Microsoft did the same in their industry when they started partnering with Apple and Google. So it's not just happening in our industry, it's happening across the industry. Another thing that we have done is also what we have in Schneider is what we call as innovation at the edge, which is a separate division which we have created in Schneider to boost innovation. We are looking at these startups. We are investing in these startups to help them scale up. We are investing. We are taking shares in the companies to help them get the equity to drive and drive faster their vision. So which has really helped us a lot to drive our overall portfolio and give an end-to-end solution for our customers. Just picking on what Brent said about the supplier base, since Schneider is also committed to the scope 3 emission reduction to net zero. We recently did a deep dive of our top 1,000 suppliers in North America. And the outcome was pretty, how do I say, pretty impressive, in terms of how many of them have in their roadmap to drive net zero or not. We did go to an extent where we have co-invested in some of those suppliers, because some of those suppliers are extremely critical to our operations. Some of them we have given some deadlines to evolve and bring the sustainability net zero vision to their ecosystem. So innovation is what will help us continue our growth journey.
So that's interesting. Schneider is going so far as to provide equity to smaller companies to bring them along. Kind of echoes of the ambassador's comments about Horizon Fund, which I think is a really interesting opportunity, and I'm glad to see those discussions are going on in Ottawa to create opportunities for Canadian businesses, maybe even some in this room, to take advantage of that and to collaborate around innovation. And Shatish, you also touched on digitalization, which we haven't spoke about, but which I think is going to be a huge driver in so many aspects of our life, including on sustainability. When you think about the load management opportunities that you can have, if you have a mature and sophisticated electricity grid coupled with the right technology in terms of load management and load shedding, certainly a lot of opportunities, but we have to bring that electricity grid into the 21st century to do that. Michael, I want to come to you because we've touched a little bit on commercialization of innovative technologies, and Brent has given an example at Kingspan with the Innovation Center, and things seem to be accelerating, so that's positive. But I would say overall that commercialization of innovative technologies is something that we've struggled with at times in Canada, if we're frank about it. So talk to us about the role that government plays, whether it's government procurement policy or otherwise. How can that accelerate, or frankly, sometimes hinder innovation?
Sure. So I think the most important thing the government can do is de-risk the scaling up of an SME that's trying to take a new technology or a new approach and get ahead of the game, right? Now, in order to do that, government has to get a little bit away from the risk-adverse culture. I understand it. I was a civil servant for 15 years. Thou shalt not do anything that makes your minister look bad in the Globe is commandment number one. But
I think it's commandment number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Around there. So I think we have to work on that. But another thing to work on, I've got quite a few scars from my Goldcorp years of procurement policies, and I was inside the company trying to argue for more local procurement as a way to manage our political risk, i.e., please, let's purchase a lot more locally, even if it costs a little bit more, because it's going to help us when I have to go to the minister to get the mine unblocked, as tends to happen in Latin America. I think a lot of it is a question of, in the procurement policies, basically including points for innovative technology, for decarbonization measures. I mean, there's a lot of technical elements there, but what purchasing officers want is a grid, an Excel sheet, or something more sophisticated than an Excel sheet that allows them to put a number on what they should be purchasing. And it's really a question of coming up with what are the technologies that we want to support with government purchasing in order to give the SMEs that critical mass that then they can take to a broader market.
Yeah, and I think what you're one of the things that you're highlighting there is, sometimes there are tensions in the goals that we have around ESG. I can think of an example that very recently I'm aware of a resource company that is developing a resource project in northern Canada in close partnership with First Nations in the area. And there is a mandate at that company to partner with Indigenous businesses, which, given the remoteness of the project and its nature, is often involving a smaller enterprise. But to qualify to get the permit, there was a requirement that the sort of highest standard of clean diesel engine was going to be used in trucks that were supplying that project. And that's a standard that the First Nations partner actually cannot satisfy. And so this is an example, and we talked a little bit about stakeholder management and some of the trade-offs where it's not easy to reconcile those. Now, I think what's going to happen is that the organization is going to acquire, the appropriate engines for for this business, so that they can meet that standard and become a supplier to the project. But there are sometimes tensions in ESG goals that I think that we could have an honest conversation about and understand the trade-offs, and then understand also how to overcome them. Now, our audience has been super patient and very attentive, and I did say that you would have an opportunity to come into the conversation. So I'm going to ask to see if our audience has any questions before I go to a speed round, and I'll ask our panelists to leave us with a closing thought. I think we can get a roving microphone going here, and Marilyn's got a question.
I'll ask a question. I wanted to ask you guys about B Corp status. I haven't heard you speak that. I just lost it. And I just wanted to understand whether that's something their companies will be pursuing, or if you see value in it. Because I believe it was Brent that mentioned, he won't work with suppliers that don't have aligned values on sustainability. And that is actually, I think, the goal of B Corp is beneficial corporation certification.
Yeah, so this would be an alternative to a traditional C Corp in the U.S., a so-called B Corp that's kind of meeting a triple bottom line. Does anybody want to take that one on B Corps? We haven't talked so much about that, but we'll see if there's someone who wants to take that one on.
I know Kingspan's looked into and kind of some continued conversations with B Corp to see. There's some structural issues in terms of the way we're organized as a company, as a holdings company, that get a little more complicated across all different P&Ls and all different regions under a holdings. So there's some challenges there of how do individual businesses, or is it something that the holdings would go after? Yeah, which becomes much more complicated. But it is something we've looked into to have that higher level of accountability across the business.
And I will say it's probably something that your lawyer can help advise you on. So, and we have a few in this office. Are there other questions for our panelists? Yes, sir.
Hi, it's Anders Fisker. I'm director of the Danish Canadian Chamber of Commerce and of UCAN. And my point is that even the UK, but especially Denmark and other northern European countries, continue to develop new wind farms. Now, in the McGuinty days, there was a moratorium put by the Ontario government on offshore wind power in Ontario. So I'd like to ask the panel, do you see any prediction for Ontario government to reverse its position on that and allow wind farms to be developed, because that's sustainable energy and it's the way of the future?
I don't know whether there's anyone on the panel that has insight into the Ontario government policy on offshore wind farms, but I do think it's an example of some of the tensions that can exist between sort of the stated goals on one hand, and then responding to local interests or community interests. And there's some tension and some trade-offs there to be had. I don't know that we're able to answer that question on this panel, but you are highlighting, as I say, the challenges that we face, and it's not always an easy or a direct path. Coming back to the point that Perry was making in his opening remarks, I'm not sure that the public understands the scale of the transformation that needs to take effect if we are going to reach our decarbonization goals. The statistics I've heard is something like, we need to mine and produce more metals and minerals in the next 30 years as we have in the last, 1,000 years of human history. And yet there are times, I think, when those who are very passionate about the environment, and I have 2 teenage daughters, so I live this, can tell you that we have to cease mining or resource development, natural gas or otherwise, and you just cannot square these goals of decarbonization and that type of moratorium on resource development. Certainly not if we want to maintain the lifestyle and in fact grow our economy and create more opportunity for all. Sir, do you have a question?
First of all, sir is a surprise me. But thank you. You talk about larger organizations and sponsoring, investing in, encouraging new innovators, etc., and that you have taken equity positions or some other innovative business decisions. How far upstream do you go? Is it only the next component supplier, or as we hear on some of these, some of the critical raw materials, and I'm not suggesting steel or et cetera, but we all hear about battery plants and cobalt and lithium and all that. To what extent do the majors actually look that far upstream?
So again, different business models we have, to address different ecosystems. When I talked about taking the investing in the startups, that is something what we call as innovation in the edge. I did mention we have done the innovation in our go-to market as well. We formed a company by name of Alpha Structure. So Alpha Structure is a joint venture between Schneider Electric and Carlyle Group from US. And that is where we are providing energy as a service. So we take the entire investment on the electrical infrastructure and we run the operations for the manufacturing plant, or for recently we are doing it for the JFK airport, wherein we are operating the assets for the next 30 years. So again, depending upon how the dots are getting connected, we have different models to address different needs, right? I have had personally a lot of discussion in terms of what will qualify them to be attractive to Schneider to participate, right? So there are certain qualification criteria, but that does not stop us to introduce the other stakeholders who are in the market to these organizations, right? There is funds allocated from Ontario government, from Quebec government for the companies which are wanting to demonstrate more net zero operations, and that is where we make those links between the different organizations as well. We do not go and invest, for example, in the mining operations to mine the batteries. That is not what we do. But we will help the mine to make their operations more sustainable and more efficient, if that answers the question, right? We will not take an equity position in that mine, but we will definitely be working with the mine to help them generate electricity at the location or mine it in a more efficient way.
Yeah, I think I'll follow up with that. I think there's a capitalism for good question here, and a risk management asset to that, and that's fundamentally changing how most of our businesses operate, where we're not all vertically integrated, and that's a very complex thing to bring into a fold of an existing business. We did some strategic investment in a number of chemical companies, Synthesia out of Barcelona, something that would have never been on the table for our acquisitions team, where it's a protection of risk. It helps us drive innovation. It helps us drive circularity in our own products, taking foam, insulation, and glycolysis and actually breaking that back down to the raw materials that we can then extract back into the product. So I think where it makes business sense for the organization, I think your question is well suited. For others, it may just be too complicated to get into something that's completely out of scope to the business that it's operating.
Yeah, we are seeing that, of course, in investments in battery materials that that the major car makers are making. And I don't want to steal any thunder from my partner Artem, who's going to be leading the raw materials panel in just a moment. I'm looking to Kathy for a time check on how we're doing. Do we have time for? Okay, we're doing well. We've got time for a couple.
Can I follow up on one more?
Yeah, please.
The raw material piece in terms of the amount of raw materials. I don't know if anyone saw the announcement from Apple. I think it was last week on committing to using 100% recycled cobalt. That's a major shift in what's going on, and I think that starts to rebut the fact that we have to extract that much more material. Plastic is another great example. We have already created enough plastic to infinitely recycle and use and not create any more plastic. That's a human problem. That's a behavioral problem with our society, not with plastic itself. I think though we have to be much more efficient in extracting back the materials we've already utilized into producing materials, get the value back out of it. Yes, there is some challenges. We've done life cycle assessment of recycling and circularity of raw material extraction versus mining or creating virgin material. It's not always a better solution. So there's trade-offs that we have to deal with, and that may become of how efficiently we can make those processes. But I don't think the solution should always just be extract more material when there's vast amounts of raw material that's going to waste. Apple's done a whole lot of work on saying every iPhone in this room they should extract every bit of that raw material and those valuable components back into making new iPhones, and they've committed to doing that. And cobalt's just the first example, so it's one of many that go across. They want them back.
Yeah, and they'll need to provide the incentives. I think I've probably got a drawer full of old phones. But you make a very compelling point. I'm involved in Neo Performance Materials, which is a rare earth and magnetic materials company. And the best rare earth mine is a magnet, is a used magnet. And so we do need to get better at recycling, but it comes back also in some cases to kind of a NIMBY issue, because sometimes the recycling facilities are facilities that people don't want in their backyard, and there are cost and other implications. But certainly we need to do a better job of making the case for that. And I think in the case of critical elements like rare earths, there's also this sort of friendshoring imperative that is going to drive that, when so much of the supply has been from China. So certainly the EU and North America are looking to change that supply mix, and I think the ambassador spoke about that very eloquently in her opening remarks. So we've got time for one or two more questions before we go to our speed round. Let me come to Adrian.
Thank you. Very interesting conversation so far. My question's for Michael. You had made a comment that Canada is far from some of the pressures, I think, driving other countries around geopolitics or access to resources and costs of energy. Canada is, I would say, energy lazy. We have energy that's relatively cheap. We are far geographically from some of the political situations around the world. From your experience, and if we look at Europe and we can put that in contrast to Canada, or if you have other countries to contrast it with, do you think that other economies are adopting good where Canada is searching for perfect? And is that slowing us in our progress? And is that maybe preventing us from taking advantage of some of the economic opportunities we have in the world today?
No, absolutely. I think our business perspective at the Chamber is that our country just needs to be far less apologetic about so much that we're doing, and underline that really the most important thing that Canada can do to contribute to international peace and security is to step up and export to our allies. So at the Chamber, we're talking a lot about the 3 Fs, food, fuel, and fertilizer, as 3 essential elements of what Canada can offer to the world. Critical minerals is another one. And when we talk to our colleagues in Europe, in Japan, and the US, that's a lot of what they're looking for us. I didn't mention the US earlier. But when I talk about distance, maybe this is the former Canadian diplomat in me, but when I think about what's going on in Europe, one of the first things I think is how it affects Canada's relationship with the United States. That's something that we sort of have to explain to our counterparts in other parts of the world, but the centrality of our relationship with the United States and how we face the world in large part through our relationship with the United States. This is a historical moment where Canada absolutely needs to step up and play a strategic role with the United States, and a lot of that is our critical minerals, a lot of that is our natural resources, a lot of that is our natural gas. It's quite striking how much of our natural gas actually is going to other parts of the world right now, but it's going through the U.S. Because we don't have the export capacity here yet, so we end up shipping natural gas to the U.S. as an export to the U.S. Quite a bit of it's actually going to the rest of the world because we haven't put together the infrastructure in order to send it directly, thereby losing quite a bit of the value at the same time. That's why I moved back to the business. Maybe we're making a contribution there to international peace and security, but giving somebody else a percentage of the profit of that.
Yeah, a lost opportunity there. I would say. Okay, I'm looking. I'm seeing going once, going twice, going 3 times on questions. We're going to go to our speed round now. We've had a really rich conversation. We've covered a lot of topics. I did say it was going to be a smorgasbord and not a deep dive. But I'm going to come back to each of my panelists, and I'm going to start to my immediate left and move down. And I'm going to ask you to, what is a kind of either an insight or a question that you would like our audience to reflect on after today's conversation? Brent, I'm going to start with you.
So I think it's great for companies to set 2050 targets. I just don't think it's actually setting any kind of commitment. I think a 2030 commitment is much more tangible. And within that, I think the leadership of the companies that are setting those is year on year targets within that. Break that down into a strategy that must be delivered year on year. We've heard that from suppliers, and I think there's absolutely everyone's running to market with these big commitments, but there's just no teeth behind them, and that's actually not driving change. I think the deliverables and the execution is what really shows the leadership from your business, and I think that's where we need to take that back within our companies and drive that forward.
I also believe in talking straight. Just another element of talking straight is, I think, business. We need to get off our back foot and just talk clearly to society. Business is simply a large part of the way humans organize themselves to get things done. And if we're talking about sustainability issues, it's overwhelmingly through business that the solutions are going to be found. And I think we need to explain that.
Well, as I said, right, there's no one person or one company which can drive sustainability, right? And sometimes we underestimate the impact we as an individual can have in the sustainability journey. So I would really ask all of you, and I keep asking that question myself, reflecting on what have I done to drive a more sustainable operations at my home, in my office, with my customers. So extremely important not to underestimate what all of us can do as individuals. Obviously, companies have their targets. Some of the companies which do not have the targets, I urge you to start looking at the quick wins, start understanding what your carbon footprint is, where the carbon leak is, how you can fix it. But start with yourself as an individual, right? This will go a long way the moment you have a self-realization that we have to move forward.
Great, thank you. I think it's been a really engaged conversation. I want to thank our panelists for that, and I'd ask our audience to join me in thanking our panelists for our conversation this morning. And I want to thank Kathy and Adrian for the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward already to next year's UCAN conference. It'll be interesting to see how far we've advanced in the coming year. Lots of work to do, lots of opportunity, and many people in this room who are going to make it happen. Thank you so much.